New York City, 1963. Inside the echoing walls of the Apollo Theater, the backstage corridors hummed with the nervous energy of young performers hoping for a breakthrough. But 13-year-old Stevie Wonder, still small for his age, sat alone on a wooden crate, gripping his harmonica with both hands, as if it were the only steady thing in his world. Motown had brought him here for a special youth showcase, a chance to prove himself in front of critics who shaped careers with a single sentence. What Stevie didn't know, what no one had told him, was that one critic in particular had come for the opposite reason. A man named Richard Kessler, a sharp-tongued columnist, notorious for destroying young talent, had written privately that Stevie was just a blind novelty act, and that Motown was hiding behind sympathy. And tonight, he was determined to prove Stevie didn't belong on any stage. Stevie adjusted his glasses nervously, unaware of the trap being set for him. All he felt was fear rising like a storm inside his chest. Clarence Paul, his mentor, knelt beside him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Stevie, you listen to me," he whispered. "Just do what you feel. Don't worry about them." But Stevie couldn't shake the heaviness pressing on him. He sensed something different about tonight, something colder in the air, something sharp beneath the whispers floating around backstage. "What if I mess up?" he asked quietly. Clarence squeezed his shoulder. "Then you mess up, and you keep going." But Stevie wasn't worried about mistakes. He was worried about not being taken seriously, about being reduced to the thing he hated most: pity. He had heard the rumors, the whispers about why he was really getting attention. He knew some people thought he was only special because he couldn't see. That thought cut him deeper than any bad review ever could. The stage manager shouted, "You're next, Stevie!" And the words hit him like an unexpected blow. His hands went cold, his breath shortened. The sound of the crowd on the other side of the curtain rumbled like a distant ocean, unpredictable, intimidating, impossible to read. Stevie rose to his feet slowly, harmonica tucked into his shaking fingers. He took a single step toward the stage entrance and froze. He could feel eyes on him, not the audience, someone else, watching, waiting, judging. Richard Kessler stood just out of reach, arms crossed, a faint smile of cruel anticipation curling on his lips. Stevie didn't see him, but he felt the hostility like heat on his skin. And for the first time in his young career, Stevie Wonder wondered if he should walk away before the curtain ever opened. Stevie stepped closer to the curtain, but every muscle in his body tightened, as if an invisible hand were pulling him backward. His breath hitched. The backstage noise faded into a distant hum. All he could hear was the thumping of his own heartbeat, loud enough to drown out Clarence's soft encouragement. The curtain rustled gently with the draft of the theater, brushing Stevie's sleeve like a warning. He swallowed hard, gripping his harmonica so tight his fingers ached. Just a few feet behind him, Richard Kessler watched with predatory satisfaction. The critic leaned toward another journalist and whispered, "Watch this. He's not ready. Motown is playing dress-up with sympathy." The words weren't loud, but they carried, heavy enough that Stevie felt something cold slide through his chest, even though he couldn't hear the exact phrasing. He sensed mockery, he sensed doubt, he sensed danger, and he felt himself shrinking inside his own small frame. The stage manager tapped Stevie's shoulder. "You're on in 10 seconds, he said briskly. Stevie nodded, but the motion felt mechanical. Clarence rushed forward, sensing the fear radiating off the boy like heat from a fire. He crouched down, cupping Stevie's trembling hands in his. "Hey," Clarence whispered, "stay with me. What are you feeling?" Stevie lowered his head, ashamed. "Like I don't belong out there," he said quietly. His voice cracked on the last word. Clarence shook his head firmly. "Don't let them decide that. You hear me? Don't let anybody, any critic, any fool, tell you who you are." But Stevie could barely breathe. His throat tightened. His lungs fought for air. He felt the weight of expectations pressing down from every direction. Motown, the audience, the industry, and underneath it all, the sharp sting of being underestimated for something he couldn't change. "What if they think I'm just broken?" Stevie whispered. Clarence closed his eyes for a moment, fighting his own frustration. "Then you show them what broken really sounds like. Because it ain't you." The curtain began to lift. A blast of warm stage light hit Stevie's face, and the roar of the crowd washed over him. But instead of excitement, the sound made his knees quiver. He stepped forward, feeling the familiar wooden boards beneath his shoes, but they no longer comforted him the way they once had. They felt foreign, dangerous, unstable, like anything he did could send him crashing. The announcer's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, little Stevie Wonder." The applause thundered, but Stevie flinched. To him, it didn't feel like cheers. It felt like an expectation he wasn't sure he could meet. Clarence watched helplessly as Stevie took his first steps into the spotlight. Kessler leaned forward, pen hovered, ready to carve the boy apart with ink. Stevie raised the harmonica to his lips, but his hands shook uncontrollably. His breath slipped out in a broken, uneven exhale. And at that exact moment, he realized something horrifying. He wasn't playing because he felt joy. He was playing because he was terrified of failing. Stevie pressed the harmonica to his lips, but the moment he blew into it, the note came out thin, shaky, wrong. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not loud, not cruel, but unmistakably disappointed. Stevie felt it instantly. The vibration of the floor changed. The air tightened around him. His stomach twisted violently. He tried again. Another breath. Another attempt, but the melody faltered, slipping through his fingers like something broken. From the audience, someone whispered, "What's wrong with him tonight?" Another voice muttered, "He looks scared." Those murmurs didn't reach Stevie's ears, but he felt every ounce of judgment pulsing through the room like static electricity. His heart hammered so hard he thought he might faint right there in front of everyone. This wasn't the stage anymore. This was a trap. Backstage, Clarence winced, gripping the curtain with white knuckles. "Come on, Stevie, hold on," he whispered. But Richard Kessler smirked. He clicked his pen and scribbled gleefully onto his notepad. Unprepared, emotional, a novelty act, crumbling under pressure. Stevie, struggling to find his rhythm, stepped forward without realizing it, and his foot caught on a cable. He stumbled. A soft gasp rippled through the audience. He caught himself, but the embarrassment crushed him like a weight on his chest. His blind eyes darted instinctively in a direction he couldn't see, searching for something, anything that felt familiar. Nothing did. Everything felt hostile, overwhelming, disorienting, and in that spinning panic, a thought cut through him like a blade. They think the problem is that I'm blind. He lowered the harmonica, shaking uncontrollably, his breath coming in short, frightened bursts. The host, sensing disaster, tried to fill the silence. "Let's give him a moment, folks," he said gently. But the attempt only drew more attention to Stevie's struggle. A few people clapped in awkward encouragement. Someone shouted, "You got it, kid!" But the words only made his chest tighten more. He felt like a spectacle, a pity. Case, exactly what Kessler had predicted. The harmonica slipped slightly in his sweaty hands. Stevie whispered to himself, voice trembling, I can't. His throat burned. His vision, though always dark, felt darker now, as if the world itself was closing in around him. He sensed Clarence edging toward the stage, ready to intervene. But Stevie didn't want rescue. He wanted to disappear. He wanted the floor to open beneath him and swallow him whole. And as he stood frozen in the spotlight, he realized with sinking dread that the critic had gotten what he wanted. Stevie Wonder doubting his own existence on a stage. Stevie stood paralyzed, the spotlight burning hot against his skin as the silence stretched longer, heavier, more humiliating by the second. The harmonica felt foreign in his hands now, slippery, unstable, like an instrument that no longer belonged to him. The applause that had once fueled him now sounded like distant thunder, and every heartbeat echoed through his chest like a warning. He tried again, just one note, one breath, but fear clamped around his lungs like a fist. The sound that escaped wasn't music. It was a whimper, a trembling, broken attempt that made the audience shift uneasily in their seats. Stevie felt it. He felt everything. The room had changed. It wasn't warm anymore. It wasn't safe. It felt like judgment. It felt like failure. And for a 13-year-old boy whose world was built on sound, that shift was devastating. Richard Kessler leaned back in his seat, victorious. There it is, he whispered to the critic beside him. Blindness doesn't make talent, sympathy does. He scribbled furiously on his pad, and those words would soon become the headline of his next column. Backstage, Clarence felt his stomach drop. He couldn't stand still anymore. He pushed through the curtain, ready to run to Stevie, but he froze when he saw the boy lift his face, chin trembling, chest heaving, as if searching the darkness for strength he couldn't find. Stevie whispered something only the first few rows could hear. "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. A few people gasped softly. Some shook their heads. Others looked away, uncomfortable. And that was worse than any boo. For Stevie, indifference was a blade far sharper than cruelty. Then the worst moment happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but piercing. A single person in the balcony let out a sigh and muttered, "Poor kid." The pity sliced through Stevie like a knife. His legs wobbled, his fingers loosened. The harmonica nearly slipped from his hands. He wasn't a musician anymore. He wasn't a performer. He was a charity case, a blind boy being watched, not heard. And that realization shattered him. His shoulders collapsed inward, a small, defeated curl of a child who had fought too hard for too long to be taken seriously. Clarence took one step toward him, but Stevie beat him to the end. He lowered the harmonica, bowed his head, and whispered, "I can't do this." The microphone barely picked it up, but the words felt loud enough to echo through the entire Apollo. And as Stevie stood alone in the center of that stage, broken, humiliated, and drowning in fear, he made a silent promise he would voice the next morning. He wasn't coming back. Not after this. Not ever again. The stage lights dimmed slightly as the host motioned for the band to step in and rescue the moment, but Stevie didn't move. His small frame seemed to fold into itself, as though he were trying to disappear inside his own shadow. The murmurs in the audience softened, turning into a thick, uncomfortable quiet that pressed down on the room like fog. Stevie could sense every inch of it. The pity, the disappointment, the confusion. To him it all sounded the same. Failure. Clarence finally rushed onto the stage, placing a steady hand on Stevie's back. "It's all right, baby. Come on," he whispered. But Stevie flinched at the touch, not from fear of Clarence, but from shame. Shame so heavy, it nearly buckled his knees. "I messed up," Stevie whispered. Clarence shook his head, his eyes brimming with emotion. "No, you were scared, that's all." But Stevie wasn't listening. He was drowning in a pain much deeper. From the audience, applause began, soft, hesitant, unsure. A few kind souls trying to lift him back up. But it didn't feel like support to Stevie. It felt like consolation, like they were clapping because he was blind, not because he was talented. His throat tightened again. His breath hitched. Tears threatened to spill, something he refused to let happen on stage. "Get me off," he whispered urgently. Clarence nodded, gently guiding him toward the wings. The audience watched, unsure how to react. Some clapped louder, trying to encourage him. Others remained frozen, unable to look away from the heartbreaking sight of a gifted child crushed by the weight of expectation and cruelty. And, behind them, Richard Kessler closed his notebook with a satisfied snap. In his mind, the story was already written. Motown's blind experiment folds under pressure. As Stevie reached the backstage hallway, he broke away from Clarence and pressed his back against the cold wall, gasping for air. His hands shook violently. The harmonica slid from his grip and clattered onto the floor, echoing through the narrow corridor like a final note of defeat. "I knew it," Stevie whispered, trembling. "They only like me because I can't see." Clarence knelt in front of him, gripping his shoulders. "No, no, don't you say that. Don't you ever say that." But Stevie's tears finally slipped free, streaking down his cheeks as he shook his head. "They don't think I'm real. They think I'm something to feel sorry for." Clarence's heart broke. He pulled Stevie into his arms, holding him tight as the boy sobbed into his shoulder. In that moment, Stevie didn't feel like a rising star. He didn't feel like a wonder. He felt like a mistake. And as the applause faded behind the curtain, Stevie whispered the words Clarence feared most. "I'm done. I'm not performing anymore." Clarence held Stevie against his chest, rocking him gently as the boy shook with sobs that came from a place deeper than fear. This was humiliation, the kind that scars. Stevie wiped his eyes with his sleeve, but the tears kept coming. "I shouldn't have come," he whispered. "I knew I'd mess it up." Clarence shook his head fiercely. "You had one bad night. One. That don't erase who you are." But Stevie didn't hear hope in those words. He heard pity, just like he thought the audience had offered him. He pushed away slightly, tightly, pressing his back against the brick wall. "They didn't clap because I was good," he said, voice trembling. "They clapped because they felt sorry for me." Hearing that kind of self-doubt in a prodigy's voice made Clarence's stomach twist. "Stevie," he said softly, "people clap for heart, and you've got more heart than anyone in this building." But Stevie shook his head, blind eyes filled with hurt. "No, they don't see heart. They just see what's wrong with me." Meanwhile, near the stage entrance, Richard Kessler lingered just long enough to overhear fragments of Stevie's trembling whispers. A cold smile spread across his face. In his mind, the narrative was complete. A blind child crumbling under pressure, a sensational headline to boost readership. He slid his notebook into his coat pocket and walked away without a second glance, leaving devastation in his wake. Another Motown staffer chased after him, trying to argue, trying to defend Stevie, but Kessler brushed him off. "Talent doesn't tremble," he snapped. "Real artists don't fall apart because a room stared at them." And with that, he disappeared into the night, unaware, uncaring, that the boy he dismissed would one day define the very soul of American music. Backstage, Clarence overheard enough to know the critic was already poisoning the story. The anger built in his chest like fire. But Stevie didn't need anger. He needed protection, and no amount of rage at a critic would fix what was breaking inside the child in front of him. Stevie slid down the wall, knees pulled to his chest, his voice shrinking to almost nothing. "I want to go home," he whispered. Clarence crouched down beside him. "We'll go, right now, but listen to me first." Stevie didn't respond. So Clarence gently tilted his chin up. One night doesn't decide your life. One critic doesn't decide your worth. But Stevie had already made up his mind. His voice trembled as he said the words that pierced Clarence's heart. "I'm quitting. I don't ever want to do this again." Silence followed, thick, heavy, helpless. Clarence sat back on his heels, stunned. Stevie meant it. Every syllable dripped with certainty. And in that moment, Motown's brightest young star, a child destined to change music history, walked away from his dream in his own mind. The Apollo crowd roared for the next act, oblivious to the collapse that had just occurred behind the curtain, and Stevie Wonder, knees shaking, cheeks wet, believed he'd performed on a stage for the very last time. Clarence sat beside Stevie on the cold backstage floor, unsure how to bridge the gap between the boy's shattered confidence and the brilliance he knew lived inside him. Stevie hugged his knees tighter, his voice barely audible. "I'm tired of proving I'm not broken," he whispered. "Every time I walk on stage, people expect me to fail." His words hung heavy in the air, carrying the weight of a child who had been judged more for his blindness than his talent. Clarence placed a hand gently on Stevie's shoulder. "You don't owe nothing to people who can't see past their own ignorance," he murmured. "You play because your soul tells you to, not because some fool with a pen has an opinion." But Stevie shook his head, a single tear slipping free. "I don't want to be laughed at again. I don't want people to think I'm only special because I can't see." His voice cracked. "I don't want to be a charity act." Clarence's heart clenched. How do you tell a 13-year-old child that the world's cruelty has nothing to do with his worth? Just then, Berry Gordy himself stepped into the hallway. He'd heard enough from staff to know Stevie was spiraling. He approached quietly, kneeling down so he was level with the trembling boy. "Stevie," he said softly, "I heard you want to quit." Stevie tensed, embarrassed. "I can't do it," he whispered. Gordy didn't lecture. He didn't sugarcoat. He simply placed a firm hand over Stevie's. "Do you know how many grown men would collapse after what you went through tonight?" he asked. "But you stood there. You tried. You fought through fear most adults can't even name." Stevie's breath hitched. Gordy's voice lowered. "One night doesn't define greatness, but running from it does." Stevie lifted his head slightly, as if trying to find truth in the darkness around him. "They think I'm a joke," he said. Gordy tightened his grip. "Then make them wrong." Those 4 words cut through the fog in Stevie's chest like a blade of light. Clarence leaned in, voice steady now. "Let him write whatever he wants," he said. "Critics don't make legends. Legends make critics eat their words." Stevie sniffed, wiping his face with the back. of his sleeve, Gordy continued, softer. What you did tonight wasn't failure, it was courage, and courage ain't pretty. It's messy, it's shaking hands and cracked notes and standing in front of people who want you to fall. He paused. But if you quit now, you'll never know what God put in you. The words lodged deep inside Stevie's soul. He didn't respond, not yet, but the tremble in his chest softened. Clarence studied his face. Stevie, he whispered, if you walk away, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. For a long moment, Stevie sat still, breathing carefully, as if measuring the weight of his future. Finally, with a trembling exhale, he lifted the harmonica from the floor. He didn't speak, he didn't promise, but he held it, and that was enough. Clarence let out a quiet breath of relief. Gordy squeezed his shoulder once, and as they guided Stevie out of the theater, the boy wasn't healed, not yet, but he wasn't quitting either, because somewhere inside the darkness, he had found just enough strength to try again tomorrow. The next morning, the sun crept through the thin curtains of Stevie's small Detroit apartment, casting a pale glow across the floorboards. Stevie sat on the edge of his bed, shoulders slumped, harmonica lying untouched beside him. His mother, Lula May, watched from the doorway, worry etched into her face. She had heard everything. She knew how badly the Apollo night had wounded him. Sitting beside him, she gently touched his hand. "Baby," she whispered, "you don't have to be strong today." Stevie shook his head. "I'm not strong any day," he murmured. "Last night showed them all that." Lula May turned his chin toward her voice. "Last night showed them you're human. That's all." Then she said something he wouldn't forget. "If God wanted you to hide, he would have kept music out of your hands." Stevie's breath hitched. For the first time since the performance, something inside him softened, just a little. The pain didn't fade, but it shifted, becoming less suffocating and more bearable. Later that afternoon, Clarence and Berry Gordy arrived at the apartment. Stevie expected disappointment in their voices, maybe even frustration. Instead, Gordy sat beside him and said, "We're not here for last night, we're here for what you do next." Stevie felt his throat tighten again. "What if I fail again?" he whispered. Clarence knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his knee. "Then we fail together," he said. "But you don't run." Gordy leaned forward. "Stevie, critics will always exist. Some will love you, some will hate you, but none of them will ever understand what you feel when you make music." He tapped a finger gently over Stevie's heart. "Only you know that. Only you can protect that." Stevie lowered his head, fingers fidgeting with the harmonica in his lap. "I didn't want them to think I was weak," he said. Gordy shook his head. "Weakness isn't breaking. On stage, weakness is letting other people decide who you are." The apartment fell quiet. Stevie held the harmonica with trembling hands, his mind replaying every moment of the painful night before, the stumble, the silence, the pity. But then another memory surfaced, the words Clarence spoke backstage. "Legends make critics eat their words." The phrase planted itself firmly inside him. He didn't feel like a legend. He didn't feel brave, but he felt something else, a spark of defiance, small but alive. Finally, he lifted the harmonica to his lips and played a single note. It wasn't perfect, but it was steady. Lula May smiled softly. Clarence exhaled in relief. Gordy nodded once, satisfied. Stevie lowered the harmonica and whispered, "I want to try again." And in that moment, the boy who had wanted to quit, who had been set up to fail, who had cried himself to sleep believing he didn't belong, stood back up inside himself. The next week, a brutal column appeared in the paper criticizing Stevie's Apollo performance, but something had changed. Stevie didn't flinch, he didn't hide. He folded the paper, set it aside, and went straight to rehearsals. Every cracked note, every missed cue, every shaky breath became fuel. And slowly, day by day, he rebuilt himself, not for the critics, not for the audience, for the music, for the fire inside him no one else could touch. And years later, when Stevie Wonder became one of the greatest musical icons the world had ever seen, people would look back on that terrible night and marvel, not because he failed, but because he didn't let failure finish him. In the end, Richard Kessler's cruel attempt to break a blind boy didn't end Stevie's career. It forged it, and Stevie Wonder emerged not in spite of that night, but because he decided to rise above it.